Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melinda Kucsera, and in this episode of Fantasy Lore and More, Celine Jeanjean, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah,
Cool.
that's right.
Awesome. I forgot to ask you before we started. I'm so sorry.
Okay, you did great.
Awesome. So Celine is joining me to talk about her book, Once Upon a Thyme. And she has a very interesting story world that it takes place in that we're also going to talk about. So it's very exciting. So welcome, Celine, and let's talk.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
All right, now tell us about Once Upon a Thyme.
Okay, so it's actually Once Upon Time. There isn't the A. That's okay.
I'm staring right at it, and it is not there. But I'm so used to the phrase "Once Upon a Time,"
it just kind of rolls off the tongue. So the concept with Once Upon Time, and time is spelled Thyme, is that it's actually a place. It's a little country in which all the fairy tales that we know, all the fairy tales actually take place there. So it's like the real place and the real people of the fairy tales that we know. And the idea being that we have kind of forgotten about this little country, but we remembered the name, that the name kind of stayed in our culture, and that's why we start our fairy tales with Once Upon a Time. But actually it's based on this little quirky country. And in this little place, Once Upon Time, a lot of things aren't very logical. It's a world that there's a lot of royals, there's a lot of princesses, there's a lot of princes, there's a lot of fairies, fairy godmothers, there's a lot of pretty milkmaids, there's a lot of courageous shepherds. But for example, there's not much in the way of middle classes, and things don't work very well because courageous shepherds are very often crowned king and they're absolutely unqualified to rule. And medicine is discouraged from progressing because queens are supposed to die in childbirth when they give birth to a daughter, so the daughter can grow up without a mother. And because that's again a trope that's very common in fantasy. And so there's all these sort of rules, I guess, in this place, and everybody has to live. The princesses and the princes have to live according to the fairy tale storylines, and so they sort of have to obey the rules of a fairy tale. But the idea is that these are ordinary people. They're not actually the people that we read about in the traditional fairy tales. So they're all trying to figure out their place in the world, and they're trying to make it work, even if they don't really fit the fairy tale expectation.
So is our protagonist in Once Upon a Time someone who doesn't fit the expectation or someone who does fit the expectations?
No, she doesn't fit. So actually in this story, pretty much none of the sort of main and even secondary characters fit the expectations. So the fairy godmother likes a drink, she likes to eat chocolate, she keeps chasing after the gardener, she mislays her wand. Prince Charming is really shy, very awkward, does not like talking to young attractive women, like literally can't speak, he just wants to be left alone. The evil stepmother is not very evil at all, she's very gardening obsessed, and she can't seem to remember to actually be mean to her stepdaughter. And then the main character is the Princess Adrianna, and same, she doesn't really feel like she fits the bill of a princess. She actually isn't particularly interested in the happy ever after. She doesn't particularly want to get a prince. She knows that that's what she's supposed to do, but she's not that fussed about it. And she's quite happy in this ramshackle little castle. She's drinking wine with her fairy godmother, and she's very close with her evil stepsister. And she knows that she doesn't fit the norm. She's supposed to have an evil stepmother who's mean to her. She's supposed to hate her, or have an evil stepsister who's mean to her as well. And she's supposed to be dreaming of the tiara and the ball gown and the balls and the princes, and she doesn't want any of those things.
What does she want?
I mean, at the start of the story, she just wants to be left alone. She just wants to be able to continue in her life with, she loves her home. She actually loves her family, even though, everybody's a little bit quirky and unusual, but she's actually quite happy. She doesn't particularly want things to change. But unfortunately, she doesn't have that option because a princess can't stay unmarried and just live out her life in her castle without a prince and without a happy ever after. And this is part of the rules of Once Upon a Time. There has to be a happily ever after. And if she just stays as she is, eventually she will end up losing her home and the people that she loves, because this is not possible in Once Upon a Time. So she has to fit within the rules. So she would have to become a witch, or she would have to become a secondary character in another fairy tale. She would cease to be the main character of her fairy tale. So either she finds a way to get to a happy ever after, or she ceases to be the main character in that fairy tale, and she has to become a supporting character basically in another fairy tale. And so she doesn't, although she doesn't want the happy ever after, she's kind of forced to find a way to get there. And the other thing about Once Upon a Time is the princesses are all forever, because if you look at the traditional fairy tales, princesses are locked in towers, they are cursed, they are rendered mute, they are basically forced to go through all sorts of quite terrible things, and then princes come along and rescue them. And so princesses are all sort of in Once Upon a Time having to put themselves through these like really quite, you know, horrible situations in the hope that that will catch the attention of a prince, and that the prince will then come along, rescue them, propose marriage, and then they get to the happy ever after, and whew, everybody's okay. And so Adriana's left with, she needs to find a way to the happy ever after, and so she needs to create some kind of situation in order to attract a prince to be able to come along and propose and create the ending that she's supposed to reach to. But of course, nothing goes to plan.
So wait, so let's go back before we go to the nothing goes to plan, because that's always, that can be fun for us readers, but not so fun for the characters. What so if she did become a secondary character in someone else's story, does she lose like her autonomy? Like how does she, like, do they, like, I guess they're aware on some level that about, like, what happened, what would happen if that happened to someone? I'm curious.
So they are aware of the fact that there are rules, and the rules are referred to as storylines. They are aware that they are supposed to live their lives according to certain storylines. So they're very aware of all the possible storylines, and they have to find a way to make things work according to, they can pick whatever storyline, but it needs to fit a particular storyline. But if she's unable to make it work as a princess, then she would get reassigned. So because Once Upon a Time is not a normal place like our real world, she wouldn't be able to just have a sort of normal kind of life. She would have to be either a witch, she would have to be, most likely would end up being a witch, and in order to do that, witches tend to be very ugly. They tend to have, so witches are often people who have failed in their fairy tale, and then they get their faces rearranged, and they kind of get forced into this witch role to then go and be the antagonist in another fairy tale. So then and then her castle wouldn't be allowed, like, she loves her home, and you know the castle would then go to somebody else, so another sort of fairy tale would take place there, and then her evil stepsister, who's actually very dear to her heart, the same thing would happen to her evil stepsister, because her evil stepsister would stop being the supporting character in this particular fairy tale, so she would have to be reassigned to another storyline. And she wouldn't just be an evil stepsister, she probably also would have to go through something quite unpleasant to be sort of put in that role. So basically she has to find a way to make a fairy tale storyline work with her as the princess, and it has to end in a happy ever after in order to stop that from happening.
I see. That's a lot of pressure.
Yes, that is a lot of pressure. And especially because her family is actually, well, her family who are her fairy godmother, her evil stepmother, and her evil stepsister are very, very close to her heart and very dear to her, and she's desperately trying to make sure that they are all okay, and that they can all continue living together in this very ramshackle little castle.
So I guess they're not evil if they're dear to her.
Well, they're
supposed to be evil.
They're supposed to be evil, but they're not. This is the thing,
right?
None of the aspects, like technically all the aspects of the fairy tale are there. You know, she has an evil stepmother and an evil stepsister, so and she has a fairy godmother. So this could very easily be like a Cinderella type story. The problem is her stepmother is very distracted, loves to garden, but because she's so distracted, does not remember to be evil to her stepdaughter. She's just off in her garden, and her evil stepsister is actually cute and nice, and so is not evil. So actually the elements are there, but nothing is working as it should, and that's part of why the fairy tale is not working, because there are no obstacles and she's quite happy as she is, and so the storyline is
Yeah.
not working, so she has to find a way to make this work.
That's interesting. That's such a neat twist that like it's all the elements are there, but it's
They're
not
not
there
working.
because they're not evil. And does she need to make them be evil, or she needed, or because they're evil, she needed some other outside element to push her into this, which is that she'll have to become a witch, and everybody will get thrown out of the castle, and
So
who
she
knows what
doesn't
will happen.
she's not going to try and make them evil. What she does is the sort of like the trump card, like the ultimate thing that is guaranteed to attract a prince is a dragon. So like if there is a dragon that is sort of there, and if you're being guarded by a dragon, if a dragon has come to the castle and is kind of taken over, and guaranteed all the princes in the land nearby are all going to be rushing over to, you know, slay the foul beast and save the princess and save the day. Like that's just, so that's the guarantee. If she finds herself a dragon and she can get a dragon to come and take her prisoner basically and the castle, then she will be able to get the required prince to come along, slay the dragon and propose marriage. But obviously getting a dragon is not exactly an easy thing. And so that's what she sets off on doing. She sets off with her drunk fairy godmother and a stable hand who's very annoying, who she doesn't get along with at all, obviously. And she goes in search of a dragon in the hope that this will bring about the conditions that she needs to get to the happy ever after.
Oh wow! But it sounds like the Prince Charming. You were saying he just wants to be left alone, so it doesn't sound like a dragon is gonna get him involved.
No, there's a lot of princes. He's just one of many princes. So there's
she
in
doesn't
Once
care
Upon a Time,
who.
yeah, she's like, I really don't care who at this point. She's like, I don't want to get married to anybody. So nobody is going to be a good choice. But if I want to keep my family safe, and if I want to keep living in this castle, and if I want to keep everything as it is, somebody needs to. I need to get married to a prince. Doesn't matter who. And no,
I see. She needs a warm body.
yeah, basically. But no, Prince Charming, who's actually called Charming, definitely is not the dragon slaying kind of prince. And he also, part of the thing as well that sets off the story, because the timeline, I guess, that in order to for her to go and reach the happy ever after kind of gets brought forward, because Prince Charming in a ball meets the evil stepmother, and the evil stepmother is so distracted and thinking about her garden, and she's there at Prince Charming's palace at the ball, and she wants to see the roses, and so he's there showing her around the roses, and the whole time she barely acknowledges that he's even there. She's just talking about her garden, about her gardener, about her roses, and she's just talking and talking and talking. Does not require Charming to respond, to listen, like just is barely aware that Charming is even there. And Prince Charming is like, this is the most incredible woman. She doesn't require me to listen. She doesn't require me to talk. This is the most comfortable I've ever been in the presence of a woman. And so the next day he proposes marriage to the evil stepmother, which obviously is a complete breach in the way things. Prince Charming is not supposed to propose to the evil stepmother, and that's the point at which the evil stepmother says to Adrianna, we need to do something very quickly because things are getting completely out of hand and this fairy tale is failing. And so Adrianna just goes, okay, I'm gonna need to have to find a dragon. This is like the ultimate thing that's guaranteed to make this fairy tale work. And yeah, and so the idea ultimately is that all these characters are all quite quirky and they're all a bit weird, and none of them fit the norm. Like none of them fit the norm that they're supposed to fit. And the idea is that at some point there will be a happy ever after. And so even though these people are all a little bit quirky and a bit unusual and unconventional, and they really don't fit the norm, like they still find a place in Once Upon a Time, and they still reach the happy ever after, because the idea being that obviously everybody deserves a happy ever after, even, you know, Prince Charmings who are not, you know, handsome and courageous, and evil stepmothers who are not particularly evil, and a princess who doesn't particularly care. Like all these people, they still deserve a happy ever after. So that's also the the theme behind the whole story.
That's such like a neat concept. So, like it sounds like though that she didn't have to get the dragon. She could have just like talked him to death. Just looking for somebody that he wasn't going to have to put in any emotional labor. It sounds like she's going through a lot of effort when there was an easier way. Maybe, but I mean, I guess if the evil stepmother is very obsessed with her garden, like she would maybe not realize. Maybe, yeah, I could see that she would not realize why the prince was interested.
No, she has no real idea, and he proposes so awkwardly that she takes a while to even understand that because she's also thinking about her garden, to understand that he's proposing, to understand that he's interested. But once the proposal has been made and it's official, like things are in motion, and the fairy tale
Yeah.
has started to fail because in fairy tales princes don't propose to evil stepmothers, no matter that they're monologuing and even if the prince feels comfortable with her, like that's not the way things are supposed to happen.
Right. And that's a sign that it's failing, that things that are
Yeah.
not supposed to be happening. I guess she didn't notice that it was failing when she was obsessed with her garden and not interested in making her stepdaughter's life a living hell.
Exactly. And there is a point at which she admits and she apologizes, like when she realizes that things are failing, she apologizes to Adrianna saying, I'm sorry, I'm realizing that I've been a terrible evil stepmother. Because she's failed to be evil, and she's failed to kind of provide the impossible odds, or that princes are supposed to overcome in order to win their princesses. If there's no obstacle, because this is the thing in the traditional fairy tales, like
Yeah.
obviously there always has to be conflict. We know this for a story to work and what have you, but also there's this thing where these princesses don't seem to have any value of themselves. It's only because they're being locked away, or they're being cursed, and they're being rendered mute and all that, then suddenly they're interesting. But did you see what I mean? There's
Yeah.
also this idea of like a princess in and of herself is not interested. She needs to be placed in this kind of impossible situation, for a prince to come along and save her.
That sucks that she doesn't have any value until she's in this, like, you're right, like in this impossible situation.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also a thing that Adrianna struggles with, because she she's aware of this. She's aware that because that she herself is not enough, and she herself is actually not interesting. She doesn't have an evil stepmother really who's doing a decent job. She doesn't really have anything bad in her life, therefore she has no value, she has no interest. Princes are not interested in her. I mean, to be fair, she is not particularly interested in them either, but she's very aware of the fact that yes, that
She's got a good life.
she's got a good life, but therefore that makes her have no value in this world.
Right. And she's
And
ineligible for holding on to the life that she has, it sounds like.
exactly, and that's also part of the transformation. It's also part of her story. It's kind of getting to a place where she actually starts to feel valuable, and not because at the start of this of the story, she also carries a lot of shame and a lot of guilt about the fact that, well, that she's failing at the one thing that she's supposed to do in life. Like she has one role as a princess, and that is for a prince to propose to her, preferably rescue her first, propose to her, and and she's failing at that. But also because in order to try to make her fairy tale work, she's going to have to go and find a dragon, get the dragon to come back to the castle, and then a prince will have to slay the dragon. So she's going to be getting a dragon killed, just so that because she herself was not enough to be able to make the fairy tale work. So there's also a lot of there's very much an arc of transformation for that character, in terms of like getting to a place where she feels more confident about who she is, like kind of getting to that place of feeling like she actually does have value, that she actually does do things that are useful, that she actually has agency about her whole life. Because otherwise the role of a princess in a fairy tale is always very passive. They get cursed, they get acted upon, and then they just kind of wait, and then somebody comes along and rescues them, and then ta-da, happy ever after. And so this is also about her like finding her agency and actually carving a place for herself in the world, because the happy ever after does not really look like the what it should, but she ends up creating something, carving a place for herself and a road for herself and a story for herself that fits with who she is and who her family is. Like, it fits them all. It's not a normal fairy tale, but in the end it works, and that's kind of her journey as well, emotionally.
That's wild. But like, if she has to go get the dragon, convince the dragon to take her like hostage, like how is she going to convince the dragon to take her hostage if she went and found the dragon and like that's got to be one hell of a conversation. What can you possibly offer a dragon? Like you went and sought them out, and now you've shown that you're plucky. You're maybe not powerful in the sense of having magical powers or anything, but you've got like you're a force to be taken to be reckoned with, because not everybody goes seeking dragons to make deals with them, and then you want them to come back and take over your castle so you can go back to a passive role. Like I would think the dragon would have a problem with that because like yeah.
No, the dragon is not the dragon does not is absolutely not interested, obviously. So this is part of it's also part of the challenge. Forcing How do you force a dragon to do what the dragon does not want to do? And obviously, I don't want to reveal sort of like
Yeah.
how she goes about doing that, but yeah, that's also part of the difficulty. It's a very tricky situation for her to be in, but yeah, and she has to find a way with her drunk fairy godmother in tow, and a stable hand who actually is trying to stop her as well, because part of another sort of issue with Once Upon Time is that because princes are forever slaying dragons, to slay the dragon, conquer and rescue the fair maiden and what have you. Well, the dragon population is getting quite low. Like they're not, endangered, but they're kind of like headed in that direction. And so he's trying to stop her from finding the dragon because he does not want another dragon to be slaughtered in the name of making a fairy tale work. So there's an added layer of difficulty.
Oh wow! And what if the dragon thing fails? What if she can't get the dragon? Like, what else could she try? Like, what else do you try when your fairy tale is failing if you can't get a dragon?
Well, this is the thing. That's kind of like she doesn't really have a plan B, because the other things that she could try are, well, she does have potential plan Bs, but they're pretty risky. What she could do, for example, is get a witch to curse her, like maybe make her mute or turn her into a swan. Like again, these are elements from other fairy tales. But Adrianna's really scared because already, as she is now, no prince is interested in her, and so she's afraid that what if she gets a witch to curse her and render her mute, and still that fails, and then she has to spend the rest of her life mute? What if she gets turned into a swan and she's still not able to get a prince to break the spell and propose and what have you? And so that's also part of the shame that she has at the beginning of the story, is that she knows that she could take some riskier ways for her, and she's feels very badly about it, that she's being, I guess, a little bit cowardly and going for it's still not an easy option, but she's going for the dragon option because she just can't stand the idea of having to go through these other options and sort of really putting herself in these really bad situations. She'd rather take a chance with the dragons than with a dragon, sorry, rather than get cursed or get locked away in a tower or get turned into some kind of animal.
What she needs to do is bribe a prince to rescue her. I don't know if that would fix the fairy tale.
She could, I suppose. She could. That's a good point. She could, but then you'd have to find a prince who would be willing to be bribed, because obviously they get a lot of female attention, and there's a lot of princes on offer. And so, like, if there's a princess who's so unappealing that she needs to bribe, then a prince, then maybe that prince would not be that interested in
Well, she
in
just needs to the happily ever after, which I assume means they get married. If it breaks down after that, the fairy tale doesn't care because it ends at the wedding.
yeah,
They could get
exactly.
divorced 5 minutes later, and it won't matter. I don't think.
Yeah, well, that's also something that I have in the story as like a side. It's like a it's not a major character at all, but she goes to visit to get advice. She goes to visit a friend of hers who's Sleeping Beauty, and so you get to have a little look at what life is like after the happy ever after. And I don't know, she doesn't find it that rosy. Like with Sleeping Beauty, her husband has a thing for unconscious women, so
Oh no!
and so she has to often like just lie there and like pretend to be unconscious. And Adriana's like, really? Like that's what it's like after the happy ever after? And Aurora's like, yeah, it's not so bad, you know. I just okay, it's a little bit boring at times, but you know, overall, like it's pretty good. And but that is her life. Like she has a husband with a with a fetish for unconscious women. So most of the time they don't actually talk. She's just kind of lying there unconscious.
Oh wow!
Um, yeah. Well, because we never get to see that. We like in
Yeah.
the traditional fairy tales, that's the idea. There's always this sort of this cutoff point of like, and they lived happily ever after. And it was kind of fun to like wonder, well, but really when you think about it, like the prince that comes along with with Sleeping Beauty and you know, who's drawn to an unconscious woman, like it's a little bit you know, it's a little bit weird.
Yes, you're now, yeah, now that you mention it, like I never thought about it, but yeah, that is a little bit weird.
Kind of creepy.
Yeah, and the yeah, wow. How do they have so many princes? Like, how do you? I mean, I guess all their parents were kings and queens, but how do you have? Is there like every acre is another castle?
Kind of
How is that?
this is the thing about Once Upon Time, which a lot of things kind of defy like logic in this little weird country. And that's one of the things, that they have a lot of royals. There's a lot of princes, there's a lot of princesses, and they're all sort of you know, bound by these fairy tale rules, but there's a lot of them. So there's like in parallel there's all these different fairy tales happening. And so for example, Adriana, the main character, is aware of the Little Mermaid, who you know who like whose fairy tale like took place, and she's heard about it. So they all kind of know about the other fairy tales. Like all these fairy tales are happening, and there's just a lot of them. It's not a logical thing because you know in a normal place you couldn't have that many rules, but that's one of the particular things about Once Upon a Time. And that's also part of what makes the country sort of lack rhyme or reason, is that you have a lot of royals, you have a lot of shepherds and milkmaids, but you don't really have much of the in between, like the people that sort of do the sort of regular jobs. And there's a few, there's enough to kind of keep things going, but it's mostly it's this sort of unbalanced little country. And so that's also why the rules are so important, because it does not have the normal things that a country needs in order to run properly and work properly. It completely relies on these fairy tales working. That's what keeps the country together. This place, it's not even really a country, this place together.
And how does that keep it together though?
Well,
The
I
the
mean,
fairy tale's working. I don't. How does that? Yeah.
well, it's I guess like it's magic. It's just the this place is, it's not a real country like you know what we have in the real world, but it's a place that's just governed by fairy tales. And the way that that this place sort of exists is by fairy tales happening the way that they're supposed to be, and with happy ever afters, you know, ending the fairy tales. And so long as that happens, everything is fine. Like we don't know what, I mean, at this point I haven't explored that in because there's only one book out so far, what would happen if the happy ever afters stopped coming. But at the moment that's just kind of the status quo. Like that's what keeps things kind of level. And yeah, and so and hence and there actually are people in Once Upon a Time whose job it is to make sure that things, you know, operate as they should. And if they see that a fairy tale is failing, then they come along and they kind of like rearrange things as needed to set off another fairy tale, but to kind of keep things running, you know, according to the rules of fairy tales.
do fairy tales ever like conflict with each other? Like two happening at the same time, just cause some kind of conflict because they both need certain elements and they both can't have those certain elements at the same time.
That's an interesting idea, actually. I haven't. I mean, in this particular book, that hasn't happened, but it probably very much could. Yeah, because you could have two fairy tales sort of colliding, and then sort of getting messy and entangled, and somehow having to like find a way back to their separate happy ever after. But yeah, because there's so many different fairy tales happening all at the same time that could very possibly happen. And I mean,
Especially with the fact that you're running out of dragons, because a lot of if multiple ones
exactly.
require a dragon and there's not many left, I could see there being a fight over the dragon.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I mean, this is actually this is a good point. Actually, I hadn't thought about different fairy tales colliding. And I'm a discovery writer, so I literally go like I start and then I just go. So I've got this like one fairy tale
Oh, I
retelling.
think you must have given away too much of the plot and the character. Did the fairy tale get mad?
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. I must have given something away that I wasn't supposed to. Broke the rules of fairy tales.
Well, you are a discovery writer, so we're discovering the book in the interview. So
Exactly.
we're discovering what the fairy tale will let you talk about.
Exactly. And we're discovering that I obviously touched on something that I wasn't supposed to talk about. Um, but yeah, no, I was saying before the fairy tale sort of stepped in and cut me off. Yeah, because I'm a discovery writer, I sort of start and then I explore as I go. And so at the moment I've got the first book, which is its own little fairy tale retelling, and then I'll be sort of playing around with what other kinds of problematic fairy tales there are in Once Upon Time. So yeah, who knows? There might be a point where multiple fairy tales collide and things would get pretty messy. Actually, I could see how that would get
Yeah,
very messy.
because a lot of them require princes. I don't know if a lot of them require like other limited things. Well, you've got a lot of princes, but if the same prince worked for multiple fairy tales, which seems
Yeah,
like the bar for Prince Charming in the fairy tale is pretty low. You be male and be a prince, be
pretty much. Yeah, I
available.
mean, and they all have. I mean, they all get blessed at birth, so they all are like ridiculously good looking, and that's also something else that Adriana finds really boring about them is that they're all ridiculously handsome, but they all kind of look the same. They just have that sort of like generic handsome look to them, all of them. But yeah, and they all at some point or another, like they're all sort of going to be taking part in various fairy tales. And then you also have very pretty, yeah, milkmaids and very handsome shepherds. You know how there's always a shepherd? Like I'm struggling to think of a fairy tale, like a real fairy tale off the top of my head, but but there's often like there's like a princess and then there's like a plucky shepherd that comes and like passes all the trials and then ends up getting crowned king. And yeah, a lot of those as well. So at some point in one of the future books I definitely want to play around with that idea as well, of because when you think about it as well, like, that's something else that doesn't make sense. A shepherd that's been tending to a flock for most of his life and then suddenly is like, okay, now you're king, off you go.
Yeah,
What a disaster.
what does a happily ever after for that look like?
Exactly. What's like, yeah, how would that look? And then what the hell happens to like that region or that country or whatever? Because
Yeah,
that is not somebody who's going to be very experienced with ruling anything. Um
no, no. Yeah, I hope he has good advisors.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of, I don't know, I mean, I really enjoy fairy tales, but also when you look at them from a uh like logical perspective, there's a lot of things that obviously are just so illogical and just don't make much sense. So it's quite good fun to kind of like play with that and explore
Right,
that.
right.
Mm.
No, that's really cool. And you mentioned that this is the only book that's out. Is this going to be a series?
Yes. So it's going to be a series of standalones where each book will cover a different fairy tale retelling. So I think the next one I'm so at the moment I'm still sort of finishing off like the story's finished, but like finishing off the publishing of Once Upon a Time. But I haven't started writing the next one, but I've got a few ideas. So I think the next one might be a Snow White based retelling, possibly. We'll see. Possibly from the point of view of the evil stepmother this time.
And what is go on?
I was gonna say who obviously is not actually going to be that evil.
And what was the fairy tale that you were playing with in Once Upon Time?
I mean, that one it's kind of a mashup. I guess the
That's what
closest
I
one,
thought.
yeah, it's a bit of a mashup of different. It's got a lot of different elements. I wasn't trying
Yeah.
to tell one fairy tale. I was just playing with the general fairy tale
Yeah.
genre. It's got like a, quite a few elements in common with Cinderella. So I
Yeah.
mean, in the evil stepmother, the evil stepsister, the fairy godmother, she's going to the ball, but then everything just goes in a completely different direction. So it's
Yeah,
more of
but she wasn't a princess in that one. Yeah.
True, true. Yeah. So it's more of a mashup. It's not supposed to be a Cinderella retelling. It's just like a mashup of the genre.
No, it sounds really cool. And is there so do you know when the next one might be out? We're recording this on February 24th, 2024. So any estimates that Celine gives us are based upon that date.
Yes. So because at the moment, so I'm running a Kickstarter campaign for Once Upon Time, and so which is running until the 14th of March. So I'm going to be focused on that and then fulfilling the campaign. But I would expect that probably by like autumn this year, probably I should have the next one. That's kind of a very loose plan. We'll sort of have to see how things evolve. But yeah, probably around sort of September, October time.
Are you going to release it through a Kickstarter as well?
Probably. Because it's Kickstarter I found is a lot of fun. Because well, I really love like beautiful books. I love the sort of the hardcovers and the special editions, and with Kickstarter you can do that, like with the illustrations and beautiful chapter headers and really making a beautiful book, which I love. But it's also been a lot of fun because I got to create a lot of cool stuff around the book. So things like character art and things like that. This like or adopting a dragon. You know how like with wildlife conservation in our world, you can like adopt a panda, for example, and then you get like an adoption certificate, and then you might get like postcard updates and things like that. So I did a similar thing where you can, because dragons are in a little bit endangered in Once Upon a Time. So I did a adopt a dragon kind of thing as part of the Kickstarter. So it was a lot of fun creating all the things kind of like around the book as well. So I think I'm going to keep doing that for future books, because it's even just for me, it's just good fun. And so far, like my readers seem to be also kind of enjoying that format. So the campaign format.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the current Kickstarter. This is for a very pretty special edition version. What bells and whistles are you adding to this?
So it's going to have illustrations. It's got, so the hardcover has 22 illustrations. It's going to have custom chapter headers. So each chapter will have like a 2-page black and white illustration spread. It's going to have a dust jacket. So there's going to be art on the case laminate, and then there's going to be a dust jacket with silver foiling. And yeah, and so that's and there's going to be, well, it's going to be digitally signed as well. And then there's going to be like vellum inserts, which is that sort of see-through kind of paper with like an illustration kind of printed on it, so you can insert that into the book. And there's going to be character art. There's going to be an extra short story, which is not like a Once Upon Time short story. It's a very loose retelling of The Little Mermaid, but with a kraken instead of a mermaid. And yeah, like lots of fun little extras. There's even like a crumble recipe, because at the start of Once Upon Time, Adrianna's eating apple crumble from the dish. So I have the recipe for the apple crumble, and little fun things like that. And there's actually going to be a postcard, like as a bonus, is going to be a postcard update from Adrianna after the happy ever after. So just to kind of see like what her life is like after her happy ever after, and if it's hopefully as amazing as it's supposed to be, and not like what Sleeping Beauty has with her husband, who has a, a penchant for unconscious women.
That is so weird.
Yeah, it really is.
And the Little Mermaid retelling, does he have a fish fetish?
Well, so with the Little Mermaid retelling, it's not a mermaid, it's a kraken who goes through. It's actually it's kind of like, not only is it a kraken instead of a mermaid, it's also gender bent. So the kraken is male, like the mermaid character is like a male kraken, and then there's like a human woman. And no, the human woman doesn't have a fish fetish or a kraken fetish. Thankfully.
So she doesn't have any weird. There's no weird fetishes there.
No, that story wasn't written as part of like the Once Upon Time universe, but it's still a fairy tale retelling. It's more of a it's still a bit of an unusual retelling in the sense that there's a kraken, but it's not got any of the sort of weird and wonderful, like, quirky characters. They're more sort of regular characters, I guess.
That's cool. And in the sequel to Once Upon Time, will we see Adrianna and the whatever Prince Charming she ends up with? Will we see an update about them? Possibly.
Yes. Yeah, they will. I want the structure to be a little bit like, like a series of romance novels where like the couple from book one will often like appear as like a cameo, like, make a quick appearance in like in the books in the later series, so you can kind of see how they're doing. So at some point, Adrianna and her, happy ever after man will make an appearance in book two, in the later books for sure, and then whoever, like the book two characters will also appear in like books 3 and 4. So everybody will sort of be there on the sidelines. It's just every book will focus on a different fairy tale.
Adrianna could set up shop and give advice to other princesses who are facing a failing, a failing fairy tale.
Yeah, she could set up a consulting business, like a princess consulting business. How to
is your fairy tale failing? Call Adrianna.
Yeah, exactly. She could have like little flyers or something, wishing your fairy tale to be working more smoothly.
Call 1-800-DRAGON.
Yeah, exactly. Struggling to get the attention of a prince.
Yeah,
I have
that could be hilarious.
That could be really funny, actually. Yeah, that's the fun thing with this concept. There's so many like fun things that you can kind of spin on their heads. Like, I really love the idea of a consulting business in a world of fairy tales, because the two things are just like so.
Or a support group. It sounds like these people.
Yes, these people need a support group and therapy.
Yeah, seriously, the failing fairy tale support group.
Exactly. Yeah, how to deal with failure when you're a failing princess.
Yeah. Do the princes ever? Do they have any? Do they get bent out of shape when their fairy tale is failing? Do they have any negative consequences, or they just go about their business and don't care?
They just go about their business. The weight, the burden is very much on the princesses, which is kind of like a parallel to the traditional fairy tales, where like the princesses go through all these horrible things, and the princesses, it's really hard to say like prince and princess plural and like differentiate them. So the princesses go through all the horrible things, and then the princes just come along and just kind of rescue them, and where everybody's happy. But like, it's always the princess who's going through something really, or not always, but mostly the princess going through something really, really difficult. So yeah, in Once Upon Time, the burden is very much on the princesses. They're the ones who have to make it work, and the princes are just quite oblivious and going about their princely lives.
That's wild. That's a little unfair too, to the princesses having to deal with all this and taking the burden upon themselves. They should rebel, man. They should.
Yeah, exactly. Like, first the support group, then the rebellion group, and then like maybe completely changing the way.
That could be fun, and that could open them up to like all different things.
Well, but then it would then beg the question of like, what would Once Upon Time, how would it look if all the princesses stopped, playing along and just and playing along with the fairy tales, and all of them decided like, no, we're not doing this anymore, and like what would happen next. That's also something that would be fun to explore.
That could be fun. And then what comes next? Maybe they don't like it and they want to go back to the that could be so fun. They think they're getting something better and they're like, this sucks.
This sucks. Yeah.
At least before we knew what we needed to do to get a happy, then it's more like real life where we don't know what we need to do to get to happily ever after, if we ever will.
Exactly. Well, and also with life, like you don't get a happy ever after and then like clunk, it ends. Like life just keeps on going. So yeah, like, there's not this like cutoff point where you can go and go like, okay, now everything is good because it's the happy ever after, and like there's no more issues and no more challenges for sure. Yeah. So maybe if they do away with the happy ever after, then they have to deal with life, which is a challenge in itself.
Or they start disappearing because after the happily ever after, like there's nothing else for them to do, and the fairy tale doesn't need them anymore. They could just start winking out, and that could be like, all right, we need to get out of this fairy tale because we get the happily ever after, and then 5 minutes later we don't exist anymore because the fairy tale they're not in service of the fairy tale anymore. Like I guess if the fairy tale got to this is so fun. I don't do fairy tale retellings, but now I'm thinking like that could be a fun thing to do.
I was just thinking it's super fun that we're kind of like brainstorming all the possible directions that this series could go into. This is great. Like I came for a podcast interview and I'm having a brainstorming session. This is amazing.
That's what happens when you put two fantasy authors in a room with microphones.
Yeah, exactly. And then you end up playing like, what if? Oh my God, yeah, what if that?
There've been quite a few interviews in here where we ended up just going off on a tangent and brainstorming. And I think that's part of the fun though, because if you've written something like which you have, which is so much in it, which can go in so many different directions, like if we had more fantasy authors in the room, there'd be more brainstorming. Exactly. Because we'd all see a thread we can tug on, a question that's niggling at us.
Exactly. And then kind of like follow in that direction, go, wait, hold on, but what if this happened? And then what if that happened? And then you kind of like
yeah, you could be writing about this for many years to come. There's just so much here. There's like it doesn't seem at first when you started talking about it, I didn't realize until I started like peeling back the layers and asking questions. I'm like, this world goes deep.
Yeah, well, and it exactly. There's just so much source material that you can play with, and there's so many things that you can question, and there's so many premises that you can kind of like spin on their heads and clash with, and yeah, there's a lot of potential. So I'm excited for the next few books, and I'm kind of this is the fun thing about being a discovery writer. I don't know, do you outline? Yeah,
I do, but the characters don't
follow.
They take the outline as a polite suggestion, and they often set it on fire and go off and do something that has nothing to do with what was on the outline. So when I announce that a book is coming, I say as little as possible about it, because the little that I say, like, maybe they'll do it, maybe they'll decide to do something completely different.
Yeah, I mean that sounds exactly like what my process is like as well, where like I will often start a book and I'll have like a bit of an idea and I think, okay, I think this is gonna be going in this direction, but I don't outline, so I just start, and then most of the time I'm like, nope, this is not going where, okay, this is happening, okay, so we're going in that direction, okay. This was not what I was expecting. But that's I don't know, for me that's the fun of being a discovery writer, is that you literally don't know what's going to happen next, and you're kind of like discovering as you go, and it's kind of fun. Like it's fun to kind of like get surprised and be like, damn, this is happening. Okay, I guess this is happening. Off we go.
Oh yeah, and especially since you're writing standalones, like I write in series, where you would think that the events of the previous book and where we left off would dictate what goes on in the next book, and yet somehow the characters find a way to go in a completely different direction, and at some point they'll make a U-turn and be like, oh yeah, we were supposed to do that and clear that up from the previous book. Maybe we should do that. Maybe we should figure out somewhere to squeeze that in. So you have like a blank canvas each time.
Well, this is my first time writing that in that kind of format. Like my previous series are all like ongoing series. So normally I'm the same as you. Like normally they and I tend to finish, like with my other series, I'll tend to like finish the story of the book, but there's always like a little thread, like something kind of like loose left at the end of a book, and then the next one picks up where that one left off. So yeah, but this is my first time trying the standalones, and it is quite nice actually. It's quite nice having this feeling of like, oh, this is completely done. Like I can go in any direction I want for the next book. Like I literally don't have, so it's kind of cool, which is why like when you asked me about the next book and I was telling you about the Snow White retelling, I mean that's what I've got in my mind right now, but it is entirely possible, so disclaimer, it is very possible that I will end up going in a completely different direction, or maybe not, I don't know, but yeah. We'll have to see, because I did, maybe I'll decide that I want to go with the princess consultant angle and and
That
see
is
what
a fun
happens there.
angle.
It's a fun angle, and I like the support group as well. Yeah,
It's kind of a thing you don't expect there, and like I
yeah,
think that could be very. I think you could have a lot of fun with that.
yes. Well, I'm also thinking that I'd like to do something like maybe a short story, or a little something with this organization that's trying to like, this like wildlife conservation for dragon thing in Once Upon a Time. Like, I love the idea of something like a dragon protection society within the realm of a fairy tale world. Like, I think that could be quite good fun as well.
That could, and they would be against this whole fairy tale business because
Mm,
it endangers the dragons. So
exactly.
they could be trying to plant the seeds of rebellion, which could be
Exactly.
interesting. Like, how do
Try
you
and
convince
collapse.
princesses to like, give up on your forget about happily ever after?
Exactly. And try and get the whole thing to collapse, and then see what happens afterwards.
Yeah, maybe
Like
the
everything's
dragons
fine
take
so long as the
over.
dragon. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, maybe the dragons become the new overlord. Lords.
And they outlaw happily ever afters in fairy
Yes, exactly.
tales.
So that nobody can live happily ever after anymore.
That could be wild. That could be wild. And then do they overthrow the dragons and put the system back in place?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. One rebellion and then another rebellion. Like, well, and it's the thing, isn't it? Like every solution to to a problem, given enough time, will become a problem itself. So yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
You could have a lot of fun weaving fairy tales into that.
yeah.
Especially since there's more royalty than anything else. Like changing governments frequently would not. It'd be more logical somewhere that has a lot of royalty.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
where everybody is either a peasant or a royal, and the peasants may not care what's going on because they're not the princesses. They're not dealing with the problems of this unless the fairy tale sucks them into it somehow. So they could pay no attention to what the government or anything is going on.
yeah, exactly. And and also like they're probably just getting on with their lives, and there's just
Yeah.
trying, like dealing with all the problems that you have in in your life, and what have you, and probably not caring that much about, because it's just like, oh my god, the world's are at it again, like just doing all their ridiculous things while we're trying to just
Yeah. It's
live
like,
our
okay,
lives.
don't go near this town, this whatever, the royals are at it again.
Yeah, exactly. Just stay away, just keep your nose down.
Yeah, yeah. And especially if you're like a milkmaid or, a shepherd or something, you have a lot of tasks that you're
That needs to
staying
be done.
close to home, that you're maybe going to the local market, but like you don't really care. You're not really mixing with the royals all that often unless a
No.
fairy tale pulls you in, I
Pulls you
guess.
in. I like the
Yeah.
idea as well of a milkmaid like being pulled into a fairy tale and being like, no, no, no. I don't-
Or their parents try to tell them their kids ways of staying out of fairy
Yes,
tales.
yeah,
Maybe they
exactly.
have their own rules to stay out of these things.
Anti fairy tale protection or behaviors.
Yeah, that could be somebody else's side business.
Exactly. There's a lot of consulting going on in Once Upon a Time, apparently.
I mean, why not? The royals have to do something, if they
Yeah.
decide not to be if they decide to not be part of their fairy tale, they got to keep the castle up somehow. If she's not, she's not bringing a prince in and his wealth, why not go into consulting, earn some coin, keep the debtors away, keep the
Exactly.
castle?
Yeah, because you're not supposed to be in debt when you're a princess. Like that is like a no-no.
And castles are like, they're pretty expensive to keep up.
Massively, massively.
And it would be
Um,
interesting, like like the economic system. Like if you're with the fairy tale, then I guess money shows up. If you're failing the fairy tale, I guess money goes away, and you have to find some other way of. This is such a cool world. There's so much here.
I'm
You can
loving your
explore so many different areas of it. It's so cool.
I was gonna say, I'm loving like the logic that you're applying to everything, and you're like kind of like digging into all these different aspects and finding all these things that like, yeah, like the money thing and like the government thing, and but
Yeah.
exactly, Yeah, that's what when I first came up with it, I was like, oh, this could be good fun. Like this, I can see this as a decent sized sandbox that I can like play around in for a while.
That's a huge sandbox because there's
Yeah,
like because you could try applying logic to all different to all
aspects.
the yeah and have a lot and you can have a lot of fun with it too, you know, and like how do people in these different classes and what if somebody did become middle class? What would they do? What would their life be like? Are they
Yeah,
dodging fairy tales on the regular? Can you see the fairy tale when it's in operation so you can avoid it
you
if
can
you
run
don't want
away
to be a
from it.
part of it?
Yeah, or like what well, but then like this is also something that's mentioned
Or
at
can
some
you
point.
join it? Can
Well,
just a
you
random person join the fairy tale and knock someone else out of it?
well the middle like that's kind of the interesting thing, I guess, with a lot of fairy tales is you often have like poor, like, you know, poor but like you know, handsome or beautiful like milkmaids and shepherds and what have you, but you don't really have like, you know, accountants or
Yeah.
like you know, you don't have like sort of, you know, the sort of middle class kind of, you tend to have like a peasant kind of like characters, or like the royals, but like in the middle, like they don't really appear. So I think if you had like somebody from with like a, you know, like a non peasant type job getting sucked into a fairy tale, I feel like that would make the fairy tale not work the way it was supposed to. Like imagine if you had an accountant like suddenly get dragged into a fairy tale, like that just would not, that was
What if the accountant wanted to be part of the fairy tale, wanted a happily ever after so he didn't have to go and do the accounting every day? It's like I can't imagine accounting to be all that exciting back in like the
the
like you know in that time period. You're counting bushels of hay and stuff, you
yeah.
know. Like what if somebody wanted to like what if they conspired to like take someone's place in the fairy tale and get the happily ever after that wasn't meant for them?
Or maybe, or somebody who's like an antagonist who keeps like screwing up fairy tales because they keep trying to enter the fairy tale and it doesn't like work so well, like
Yeah.
ends up being like the bad guy because they keep sort of like, they're like, no, I want the happy ever after, but by doing that
Yeah.
like it keeps causing things to screw up.
That could be fun.
Yeah, the evil accountant.
Or you know, it doesn't have to be an accountant. Could
No.
be you know something else. Whatever works in Once Upon Time. But like that could be a really cool thing. Like somebody like we've got in the first book people who don't want to be in the fairy tale. But what about people who want to get in on that? And like can they like how does that like is there a way that they can get into it and become part of it and get that happily ever after?
I mean, I guess so. There probably would be, because in the same way that like Adriana in this book kind of like forces her way to a happy, you know, it's not like it's not flowing. It's not like a
Yeah.
prince has just kind of come along and like she ends up forcing, you know, a fairy tale that's a very unconventional fairy tale in the end, but she ends up forcing a fairy tale to happen. So I imagine that, you know, somebody else could kind of like try to force something to happen. And again, it would be yeah, like it would be another fairy tale that's like unconventional and kind of ends on a pretty unconventional happy ever after. Yeah, that's one thing that really drew me as well when I was first coming up with the concept, is I really like the idea of yeah, of the unconventional happy ever afters, and I like the
Yeah.
idea of like unconventional people and unconventional situations, and still it's a happy ever after. It's like it's a kind of, you know, it's their happy ever after. It kind of like, it doesn't fit the norm, but it fits them.
No,
Um,
that's it, and that's what it's supposed. That's what a happily after should be. It should be tailored to the people who are having it.
exactly, exactly,
It
exactly.
should.
Which is the idea, right? It's like, because the happy ever afters in traditional fairy tales kind of all look the same, but actually, what it should be is it should be like everybody's happy ever after should look unique to those people, because yeah, because we're all different.
Or you could have it so that it looks conventional from the outside, but in once you're in their point of view, you see it's not
You can
conventional,
see
but
it's not.
it's makes sense for them and it's their
Yeah,
happily ever after. But somebody looking from the outside would just see the traditional, oh, they got married.
exactly.
You
And then they
know?
live happily ever after.
Yeah, not knowing that, like, they eat cake on Fridays and that makes them blissfully happy or something. Or they garden together or whatever, make,
Mm. Yeah, all the yeah, but that's and that's an actual happy ever after, like not like the unconscious
yeah.
fetish thing.
Yeah. Did she have to be unconscious at their wedding?
Good question. I'm trying to think actually with the original fairy tale, if you actually see the wedding. I can't remember. I think you do. No, I think she's conscious at the wedding. Oh, and he also has a thing for spinning wheels, so he also likes there to be a spinning wheel around.
Well, they're handy. I mean, that's how the yarn gets made, that
Oh yeah, no, but he likes there to
becomes
be
clothes.
like in terms of like bed shenanigans, like with sex, like he likes there to be a spinning wheel. Like there has to be a spinning wheel involved. So he's got a lot of fetish. This guy, this prince.
And but it still meets the definition of happily ever after somehow, so it must be working for her.
Yeah, well, it does. Like all the elements were there, and they had the big wedding, and now they're living happy ever after, and that's what the happy ever after looks like. Yeah, and just
Well,
an unconventional one.
yeah, I mean, as long as she's enjoying it, it's all right. Have the
Exactly.
spinning wheels in bed if that makes you happy.
Exactly. Exactly.
The wheel fetish.
It's a niche fetish for sure.
They do not have an OnlyFans account. Sorry to disappoint.
Well, that would be a fun thing as well. Fairy tale OnlyFans account. What would that look like?
I mean, you could, if there. I mean, there's a seedier side of every town and
There's
city.
always,
So Once
yeah,
Upon Time probably has a seedier side as well.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Something else to explore.
Yeah. And does that seedier side involve actual seeds? Who knows? Because you could have a lot of fun with wordplay too, and because
Yes,
there is a lot of that in the original fairy tales.
yes, yeah. And I
No.
love Terry Pratchett as well. Like that, he's one of my favorite authors, and he does a lot of stuff
Yeah.
with wordplay. Yeah, no, I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, no, I've read a lot of his books too. I don't think I've read all of them because there are a lot of them, but I've
Yes.
definitely read The Color of Magic and many other ones.
Mm. Yeah,
I
yeah.
still like. I know a lot of people don't like Rincewind, but I always thought he was fun.
He's fun. Like when I first read The Color of Magic, I didn't like him so much, but yeah, he is quite good fun. And then I like all the other stuff that are outside of the Color of Magic series. Like he's got some amazing ones, but I actually haven't read all of his books because I know that no more books are coming.
Yeah,
I sort of like
yeah.
spread them out.
No, I do the same thing. I am slowly reading the rest because I know there won't be more.
Yeah, yeah. It's when you know there's going to be an end, you're like, oh. It's like when you know that it's still like you want to get. It's even with a good book, you're like you're racing to the end, but at the same time, you're like, no, I don't want it to end.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All good things come to an end.
They do. They do.
That sucks. Well, it's
Yeah.
been fantastic having you on. Is there anything else you want to say about Once Upon Time or the Kickstarter or the failing
Um,
fairy tales?
no, not really. I mean, just that, yeah, the Kickstarter is there's a lot of fun stuff. So yeah, definitely go and check it out. But yeah, no, it was super fun. It was actually really fun brainstorming all the potential for this kind of crazy little fairy tale world. I feel like
Yeah.
I'm leaving with loads of new ideas.
No, I love brainstorming and I always have like more ideas than I know what to do with. So all ideas you got here, take them. I will never write them. There's 500 ideas sitting in my head in front of them.
Yeah. I
So
can totally sympathize with that, because absolutely the same. There's just like it's like your TBR pile, which is just never ending, and then you have your ideas pile, and it just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and you're like, man, I'm never going to be able to write all of them, because the more you go, the more ideas you get.
yeah, and I've already promised to write a whole bunch of other ideas that have been in my head for a really long time. So
Yeah, and I'm sure that your readers are anxiously waiting for.
I hope so. I hope so. We always hope that. We don't know, like, what that's the scary thing about writing it, is you're like, well, I like it. Is anybody else gonna like it? You know? Is anybody else gonna find the dialogue on page 4 really hilarious?
Yes. Does anybody else have my weird sense of humor and think this is going to be really funny?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you release the book and you're like, did you like it? Did you laugh at the places I hope that I laughed?
I mean,
Are you entertained? Like that scene from Gladiator.
Yeah.
Somehow that's always in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, it's kind of a nice thing, because it almost feels like whatever sort of like thing we're into, there's like we're all a little bit weird, so there's going to be other people who have the same, like, whose weird matches your weird, like, and that's the really lovely thing, isn't it, about writing and putting your books out?
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, people who are like weird, like my kind of weird. It's like, yay.
Yeah. It's just finding them sometimes that's like, you know, I hope we all find our other people who match our weirdness.
Exactly.
Because that's so much fun. But yeah, so don't forget to check out the Kickstarter for this. The link is going to be in the description or the show notes, so that the fairy tale doesn't fail.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Help me keep the fairy tale world going.
Yeah, because as you heard, like, they have a distinct lack of middle class. It needs capital, and if you would like to go become the middle class of that world, definitely dive into the book. And it sounds like a ton of fun. It sounds really. It's. I think this sounds awesome.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm so glad you like the sound of it.
Yeah, no, I'm really invested in it now. After the brainstorming, I feel like these people are my new best friends. You know, I need to go to the support group. I might need advice about how to keep my fairy tale from failing.
I'll let you know as soon as Adrian has set up her consulting business.
That could be so fun. You could have you could have people writing. You could do that as a newsletter too. That would be so fun.
Yes, or like a pamphlet or something that's like published every so often, and it's just like, hey, here are today's tips to keep your fairy tale going.
Yeah, and maybe some gossip from that world about other tales that you may have thought of but are not yet writing about.
Exactly.
That could be fun.
Be a good way to like write down all the potential ideas, and I can just like cherry pick which ones to.
Yeah,
this is great. This is fantastic.
You can encourage readers to like write you with like questions for Adrianna, and that could help generate like more ideas and more things to explore in there. Like, this thing could just go on for this thing could become its own franchise. It's very cool.
Oh, thank you so much.
Disney needs to call you, because they have like a monopoly on a lot of fairy tales.
Yeah, they do. They've remade a lot of them, haven't they?
Yes. That's one thing I forgot to ask you before we end. How do you do the fairy tale retellings without, running into the juggernaut that is Disney and poking that bear and getting them on your case?
Yeah, I mean, I guess because what I'm doing is so quirky and so different, like, I'm definitely not in any way, shape, or form like poking at the Disney, because for example, the Little Mermaid, like, Disney didn't invent the Little Mermaid. It has been around for a really long time before, but it's obviously not doing anything that's remotely close to the Disney version. But at the moment I'm not too worried, because I think I'm going so far in the sort of like quirky, unusual kind of side of things that I'm hopefully well away from that. But I definitely, that is a bear I do not want to poke. I don't even want to I don't even want to think about a stick. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess when you're looking at potential fairy tales to go, you're going back to the source material, and anything that gets too close to Disney, oh no, this is where we change it.
Yes. Yeah,
This is where the fairy tale fails.
Yes.
So we don't hit it. Yeah, no, that's so that's a concern that you have when working on this, or because you're taking it in so many other directions, you don't worry about it?
I'm not really worried about it, to be honest. Because I feel like I'm too far removed. Like I'm not trying to do a serious or also genuine is not quite the word I'm looking for, but I'm not genuinely trying to rewrite these Disney fairy tales. I'm going in such a different direction that I think I'm fine on that front. I mean, yeah.
No, I think so too, because it doesn't sound like the fairy tale would survive in your first contact with your world intact.
No.
The minute it starts to happen, it's completely twisted and bent out of shape into something else.
Exactly. And it ends up, by the end, you're like, yeah, that doesn't look at all like, where is the Disney fairy tale? Like, this does not look like it.
That's when you put in the author's note. Well, this was inspired by X fairy tale, but you can't really tell anymore because it went in such a weird direction. But in case you were wondering where the idea started, this was it. Do you use like Grimm's fairy tales, or like is there like a source that you use for the fairy tales that you're looking at bringing into this world and modifying, or?
So Grimm's and Hans Christian Andersen. But with Once Upon a Time, because it was I kind of started off wanting to play more with the sort of more sort of general concepts and tropes and kind of rules of fairy tales. So that's why it's a bit more of a mashup than a straight up retelling. But as I go forward, like if I decide to retell one specific fairy tale, then I would be using the source material from whichever collection, and sticking to that. But we'll have to see whether whether I do go for a Snow White retelling for book 2, or if I go into the consulting fairy tale angle.
That'll keep you far away from Disney.
Yes, I think I'm so long as I'm going for those angles, I'm pretty safe.
Yeah, no, and those are such cool, fun, unexplored areas that you could have so much fun with. No, this has been awesome. I know I kept you longer than we said, but those questions.
That's quite all right. I had a great time, actually. It was really fun for me as well. I love the brainstorming.
No, come back anytime. The brainstorming is free. Actually, the whole thing is. That's bonus.
It's bonus, exactly.
Yeah, I like throwing.
This interview, leave with a brainstorm.
Yeah, that's happened a lot because I never took those tests where they give you the things, but I think ideation would be pretty high for me.
Oh yeah, that would make sense.
I'm full of ideas. I can't use them all, so they're all yours to use. But thank you so much for coming on, and so don't forget to check out Once Upon Thyme by Celine Jeanjean, and don't let the fairy tale fail. help that fund. You don't want to know what happened. You don't want to find out what happens if the fairy tale fails.
The fairy tale fails, exactly.
Yeah. It doesn't sound pleasant.
But thank you so much.
Oh no, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say thank you so much for having me. I've had such a good time.
Thank you so much for coming, and that'll do it for this episode of Fantasy Lore and More. So make sure to follow, like, subscribe, all those things, so that you get notified when the next episode drops. And we'll be back with another fantasy author and another fantasy book next week. Thank you, and have a great day or great night wherever you are.